Over these last days, there's been a reminder that it's been suggested that every character, every archetype, and every symbol in every story represents an aspect of our self, an aspect of our psyche. So let's see what happens when we mix the characters, archetypes and symbols of three very simple stories together. First is a story about the young man who discovered that if he learned the most great name, he would have the power over creation. So he set out to find someone who could teach him the most great name. And he learned that there was a certain Sufi master who knew this name and had the powers to utilize it. So, making the long journey to find him, the young man came into the Sufi master's presence and asked him, would he teach him the most great name? And the master said, first you will have to meet my master and pass a test. The young man said, tell me, what is it that I have to do? And the master said, go to the gates of the city and remain there from morning till dusk, and then return to me and tell me the most significant experience of the day. So this is what the young man did. And when he came back and came before the master said, well, what is that happened, that you witnessed, experienced today? And the young man reported, well, while I was sitting there were many comings and goings. But then an old man came to the gate carrying a heavy load of wood. And he wanted to enter the gates. But the soldiers, the sentries there, demanded that he pay a fee for entry into the gates. The old man said that he had no money, and he begged the guards to allow him to enter and sell his wood and then come back and pay his toll. But the soldiers refused to do so, and they beat the old man, stole his wood from him, and sent him away. Well, said the Sufi master to the young man, what was the awareness that arose out of this experience? And the young man said, I thought to myself that if only I knew the most great name, then the end of that story would have been different. The great sage said, well, my son, that old man was my teacher. The second story is about a trader. He lived with his family at the base of quite a tall mountain. But being a trader, sometimes he loaded up his wagon and crossed the mountain to the other villages that were in the valleys that lay beyond the mountain range. And this trader had a son, Quite a strapping lad he was, and very often his father would take him on these journeys. So one day when the trader was making one of these trips and invited his son along, who with great excitement accepted. But after they'd hitched the horse to the wagon and loaded it up with the goods to be sold, they set off up the mountain. They hadn't gone very far when they reached an avalanche. Rocks covered the road in front of them so that they could not pass. The young man jumped down from the wagon and he said, "I will do it, Father." And so, taking stone by stone, he threw them over the cliff. But then there was one large boulder remaining that, no matter how he tried, he could not move. He put his shoulder to it and he heaved, but the rock would not move. So he came back to his father, who was waiting in the wagon, and his father said to him, "What more can you do?" So the young man thought for a moment, and looking around, he found a log. So he put the log under the boulder and he tried to heave it off the road, but all his efforts were in vain. He came back to his father, and his father said, "What more can you do?" And the young man thought for a while. Then he remembered that they had for sale some ropes in the back of their wagon. So he took a rope and put it around the boulder and tried to pull it off the cliff. But again he failed, came back to his father, and his father said, "What more can you do?" Well, then, after some thought, the young man unhitched the horse from the wagon, attached it to the ropes, and had the horse try to pull the boulder to the edge. But again, it did not work. He came back to his father after rehitching the horse to the wagon. His father said, "What more can you do?" By this time, the young man was very angry. He was tired. He was covered in sweat. He said angrily to his father, "Father, I've thought of everything. I've done everything." His father said, "But you have not asked me for help." With tears in his eyes, the young man said, "Father, will you help me?" His father climbed down from the wagon, and with both their shoulders to the boulder rolled off the edge of the cliff, and they continued on their journey. The third story is that story about the king, the young king, but his duties as a king were so heavy on his shoulders. He never had time. He never had peace. At night he tossed and turned, concerned about the trials and tribulations that would come to him the next day, and going over the problems that had yet to be solved. He longed for peace. So, in his desperation, he heard that there was a great and knowledgeable sage hermit who lived at the edge of his kingdom. So, in disguise, he went off to see if this old sage could help him. Now we know the ways of these hermit sages. Even in his disguise, he was recognized as the king and gently asked what was it that he was seeking. And the king said, "I'm so exhausted. I have not a moment of peace. Can you teach me how to find peace? My duties, responsibilities weigh so heavily on me." "Oh," said the sage, "that's no problem at all. Just let me take over your kingdom." Well, the king felt that a great weight had fallen off his shoulders. He was all too ready to hand over the reins of his kingdom to the old sage. And he said to him, "I'll take you back to my palace straight away so that you can start your duties, and then I can go into the forest and sit and find rest." "Oh," said the sage, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that at all. I can do that all from here." He said, "Just go back to your palace and find one of your best advisors who can take over the reins of the kingdom. And when he gets into trouble, he can just come and ask me and I'll solve it for him." "Oh," said the king, "but there's nobody who can do it as good as I can." "Oh," said the sage, well, you better take over that job then, hadn't you?" "Oh," said the king, "well, I can do that." So this is exactly what he did. He went back to his kingdom. He took up all the duties that he did before, but he carried no burden. There was no sense of responsibility. He had sleep at night. He didn't toss and turn. And in fact, he didn't even have need to go to the old sage and ask for advice, because it all seemed to happen in the way that it should. So, if we have the characters and archetypes and symbols of these simple stories and we put them together in our cooking pot, our cauldron, what is it that comes up as an awareness for us? What do these stories mean for us? Every character, every archetype, every symbol, clearly recognizable as an aspect of our self. What does the sage, the father, and the master represent in us